Beneath the Flood, a story of Tien and Jack. The night the flood came, the air had been unusually still, as if nature itself was holding its breath. It wasn't a storm that rolled in slowly. It was a sudden roar of water, wild and unforgiving, surging through the narrow valleys like a beast let loose. The rain had pounded for hours, but no one expected the mountain water to collapse into a raging river that swept through Tien's farm without mercy. Her tiny cottage nestled at the edge of the property had always felt like a sanctuary. It was where she woke up with sunlight on her face and fell asleep to the sounds of crickets and wind. But that night, none of those soft things remained. Instead, there was chaos: dogs, barking pigs, squealing wood cracking under pressure, and the terrifying rush of water consuming the earth beneath her feet. Tien barely made it out. With only minutes to spare, she clutched her phone and scrambled uphill barefoot, slipping in the mudlungs, burning her heart pounding, as if it might give out before the mountain did. When she finally looked back from the hilltop, her world was underwater. At that very moment, Jack was already on his way. The moment he saw the first report of the flash flood on his phone, his instincts had flared. He had tried to call her once, twice, then 20 times, but the signal had already died. What he felt then was not just fear. It was helplessness, wrapped in panic. He drove through the night headlights slicing through the rain like searchlights. When he found her trembling and covered in mud, she didn't cry, but Jack nearly did. That flood changed everything. In the days that followed, Jack made a quiet decision. He would rebuild her home, not just repair the damage, not just fix a few broken boards or drain some waterlogged floors, but truly rebuild it from the ground up. She deserved more than that frail cottage at the edge of a dangerous slope. She deserved a place of peace, of safety, of permanence. He didn't tell her immediately. Instead, he started surveying the land himself, walking the soaked property with a notebook in hand, talking with engineers, studying the terrain. He noticed how low the farmhouse sat, and how the soil betrayed it the moment the rain grew heavy. He would raise the foundation, add embankments, reroute the water path, do whatever it took to give Tien a space that wouldn't break at the first touch of nature's fury. But Tien, sensitive and quiet-hearted, began to notice the way Jack came home more tired. How he stayed up late, poring over plans. How he spoke to workers in hushed, serious tones. At first she thought it was work. He was, after all, a builder by trade, dedicated and proud. But soon it became clear he wasn't just fixing homes. He was fixing her home, and guilt crept in. Tien had never been the kind of woman to ask for things. Growing up, she learned to make do. Her parents died young. She had survived on sheer will, on instinct. So when Jack, the man she loved, took on the burden of her life as if it were his own, she felt ashamed. She began to avoid the topic. She would say things like, "The house isn't that bad," or "We can patch it up, no need to spend more." But Jack would only shake his head gently and say, "I want to do this for you." Those words wrapped around her like both warmth and a weight. She didn't want to be a weight. Jack had his own dreams, his own projects. He had just landed a major contract to design a villa for a high-profile client, an opportunity that could finally allow him to open his own firm. And yet he kept postponing it. All for her. The irony was unbearable. Each time she looked at the soaked barn, the broken fence, or the dark stain on the walls from where the water had climbed, she didn't just see damage. She saw debt. Not monetary, but emotional. A debt of care she wasn't sure how to repay. She decided to help the only way she knew how. One early morning, while Jack was still on site managing a project, Tien went to the local squash garden. She spoke with an older woman there and bought a basket full of green, heavy pumpkins, fresh and fragrant. Then she took them to the village market and sat alone under a slanted metal roof, calling out to passers-by, "Fresh pumpkin, $15,000 each." She wasn't a seller by trade. Her voice trembled, her hands were clumsy with change, but when someone stopped and smiled, she beamed like she'd won the lottery. That evening, she returned home exhausted but proud. She had sold every single squash. It wasn't about the money. It was about agency, about proving to herself that she still had something to give. That she wasn't just a cause to be rescued, but a person with power, however small, to shape her fate. Jack came home and saw her asleep on the couch, still in her dusty market clothes. Her hair clung to her cheeks with sweat, and her hands were stained from squash sap and sunlight. He sat beside her silently, then brushed a stray hair behind her ear. "I know what you're doing," he whispered. And he did. He understood the pride behind her stubbornness. He saw the quiet strength in her every step. And in that moment, he didn't just see a woman he wanted to protect. He saw a partner, a survivor, someone whose scars matched his in different ways. Later that night, they sat outside under the stars, sharing warm rice and grilled sweet potatoes. Jack looked out at the flooded remnants of her past and the slow, painful rebuild of their future. To Tien, he said softly, "You're not a burden. You're the reason I'm building." She looked at him, eyes glistening, and for once, she let the guilt go. Not because it had disappeared, but because love was heavier and stronger and more enduring than any flood. Jack's life hadn't slowed down since the flood. If anything, it had accelerated. The construction site was now his second battlefield. The flood didn't just wreck homes. It tore through foundations, buried stone in sand, and made every plan harder to execute. Materials were delayed, the roads turned to thick, sticky mud, and the labor crew grew weary from digging, dredging, and rebuilding under the heat and the looming threat of another storm. Yet Jack kept showing up. He walked every square meter of the land, with his boots caked in clay and worry. He listened to every worker's concern, motivated them when morale dropped, and adjusted the building plans day after day to suit the erratic weather and unstable terrain. He didn't complain. He didn't rest. And though he barely said it aloud, the drive wasn't just about his job. It was for Tien. She didn't see all of it, but she felt it. There were days when he came home after nightfall, his shoulders sagging from weight she couldn't carry. And every time he smiled at her, as if nothing was wrong, she felt the edges of her heart pull tighter. So she kept moving. When Jack was away, Tien returned to her familiar routines, tending to the surviving animals, cleaning what was left of the old shack, and quietly repairing fences with makeshift tools. But the damage had spread far beyond what her hands could manage. It wasn't just the buildings, it was the entire ecosystem. Crops had drowned, fences had collapsed, feed had spoiled, and equipment had rusted from days submerged. Still, she refused to just sit and wait. The market became her silent battleground. She returned again with baskets of fresh squash V09, the locals called them. Heavy, fragrant, and good for soups. She'd buy them for 5,000 VND per kilo and sell them for 8,000 or 10,000. It was a small margin, but it was hers. Each morning she'd walk the 4 kilometers to the nearest village market. No stall, no permanent sign. Just her voice rising above the crowd. Fresh squash, just picked sweet and natural. Sometimes she sold out in an hour. Sometimes she sat there all morning whispering prayers into the breeze that someone would stop. Not for pity, but for produce. She wanted to be seen as capable, not broken. And she was. Tien quickly became known to the villagers not as the girl from the flooded farm, but the quiet one with good vegetables and a gentle smile. Her confidence grew, and so did her resolve. She still missed her animals, the dogs she'd raised, the rabbits that used to nibble on her fingers. But in their absence, she found something else, strength. But at night, that strength flickered. Sometimes, lying in bed, she would stare at the ceiling, wondering if Jack resented the effort he was putting in. Wondering if every bag of cement, every late meeting, every dollar spent on soil or stone or labor was a silent price he paid for her existence. She wanted so badly to tell him to stop, that the house was fine, that she could make do, that he didn't need to build the world for her. She wanted to say it, but never did. Because she also knew Jack. He didn't just build houses, he built meaning. His hands were made for architecture, yes, but his heart was made for people. And she was the one he had chosen. One evening, after returning from the market with empty baskets and a worn smile, she found Jack waiting near the gate. The construction site was taking shape now, higher walls, better drainage, thicker foundations. He took her hand gently. "I came here today with the survey team," he said. "We're going to raise everything. Not just repair it, we'll replan the whole farm. Higher ground, safer paths, new layout." She nodded slowly, taking in the weight of his words. "But Jack, it'll cost so much. We can't afford it." "I can," he said simply. "And even if I can't, I'll find a way. I don't want you living in fear of water every season. I want you safe. And more than that, I want you free. But I don't want you to carry all of this." "You're not a burden," he replied without hesitation. You're the reason." In that moment, the walls she had been carefully rebuilding inside herself crumbled. Tears she had hidden for weeks found their way down her cheeks. Not from sadness, but from the simple ache of being understood. "I just want to help too," she whispered. "I want to grow. I want to work. I want to be someone who walks beside you, not someone you have to carry. And that's exactly who you are," he said, pulling her into a quiet embrace. "You've always been that." They stood in silence, the sun dipping behind the hills, casting a golden glow over the half-built beams and broken fences. There was still so much work to be done. The flood had taken a lot, but not everything. Jack saw in her a kind of strength that didn't shout, but stood firm. A strength that survived rain, wind, and the slow rebuilding of something better than before. Tien in turn saw in Jack not just a provider, but a partner. Not a savior, but someone who walked beside her even when she had no road to stand on. They would build it all again together. Not just a farm, not just a house, but a life steady, strong, and rooted in love that neither floods nor fear could ever wash away.